On a sun-scorched Texas ranch in 1866, a young slave girl's dreams of freedom seemed as distant as the rolling horizon she secretly sketched in her tattered notebook. Every dawn brought another day of servitude under the iron rule of a callous rancher who saw her as mere property. But fate had other plans. When a wealthy cattle baron's son rode in from the west, his heart moved by her quiet strength and dignity. What began as a simple act of conscience would soon escalate into a high-stakes confrontation that would shake the very foundations of their society. As the wealthy heir prepared to risk everything, his fortune, his reputation, his future, in a desperate gamble for her freedom, one question lingered in the air. How far would a man of privilege go to challenge the brutal rules of his own world? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather-bound ledger in Blackwood's study told Sarah's story in cold arithmetic. Purchase price, $800. Date acquired, March 15th, 1854. Previous owner, estate of Jonathan Hayes. Current market value, $1,200. Her entire existence reduced to numbers in a book, alongside cattle counts and feed costs. Sarah knew these details because Martha had taught her to read in secret during stolen moments in the kitchen when Blackwood was away on business. The cook had started with simple words scratched in flour on the wooden counter, wiped away before anyone could see. Knowledge, Martha would whisper, is power they can't take from you. The study, where Sarah dusted each morning, housed more than just ledgers. Portraits of Blackwood's ancestors lined the walls, stern-faced men and women who'd built their fortune on other people's labor. The newest addition was a daguerreotype of his late wife Eleanor, her gentle eyes a stark contrast to the hard faces surrounding her. She was different, Martha had once told Sarah. Miss Eleanor saw people as people. When she died, something in the master died too. The cook rarely spoke of Eleanor now, but her influence lingered in unexpected places, like the small library of books Eleanor had collected, which Blackwood couldn't bring himself to dispose of. The morning's incident at the post had left Sarah's back raw, but she forced herself to move carefully as she worked, knowing Blackwood's guests would arrive soon. The ranch house had to be perfect. Every surface polished, every corner dusted, every piece of silver gleaming. Any flaw would mean another session at the post. Through the study window, Sarah could see ranch hands preparing for the visitors. Tom led freshly groomed horses to the front paddock, while other workers hastily repaired fences and cleared debris from the yard. Blackwood's pride demanded a flawless presentation. The sound of hooves announced the guests' arrival. Sarah watched from the window as 5 riders approached, 4 men in expensive suits and one younger man whose bearing set him apart. He sat his horse with natural grace, and even from a distance she could see he handled the animal with gentle confidence. "Girl," Blackwood's voice boomed from the hallway, "get out here and tend to our guests." Sarah hurried to comply, keeping her eyes lowered as she moved to take the visitors' coats. The younger man was the last to enter, and as she reached for his jacket, their fingers brushed briefly. The unexpected contact made her start, almost dropping the expensive garment. "Careful there," he said, but his voice held no malice. If anything, there was a note of concern. Sarah risked a glance upward and met kind eyes that studied her face with unexpected intensity. "James Carlton," Blackwood announced, clapping the young man on the shoulder. "Son of the biggest cattle baron in Texas. These other gentlemen represent the railroad interests." He shot Sarah a warning look. "Girl, see to the refreshments." In the kitchen, Martha already had a tray prepared with coffee and fresh biscuits. "That's young Carlton, is it?" she mused, adjusting the cups. "Heard tell he's different from his daddy. Runs his own spread up north. Treats his workers fair." Sarah tried not to let hope flutter in her chest. She'd learned long ago that hope was dangerous. Still, as she carried the tray back to the study, she couldn't help noticing how James Carlton's eyes followed her movements. not with the usual dismissive glance of visitors, but with thoughtful consideration. The men were deep in discussion about railroad lines and cattle drives, but Sarah caught fragments as she served them. The railroad would change everything, they said. The old ways of doing things were ending. Progress was coming to Texas, whether people liked it or not. Progress, Blackwood scoffed, is just another word for chaos. Some things shouldn't change. His hand strayed to the ledger on his desk, and Sarah knew he was thinking of the neat columns of figures that defined his world. But when she glanced at James Carlton, she saw something different in his expression. A quiet determination that suggested he might disagree with Blackwood's assessment. As she slipped from the room, she felt his gaze follow her, and for the first time in years, that dangerous spark of hope flickered to life in her heart. The gold watch in James Carlton's hand caught the afternoon light as he checked the time. The business meeting had dragged on for hours, but Sarah noticed he seemed more interested in studying the ranch's operations than the railroad negotiations. His eyes often drifted to the workers in the yard, noting their conditions with a slight frown. "Another coffee, Mr. Carlton?" Sarah asked softly, approaching with the pot. The other men had retired to the veranda to smoke, leaving him alone in the study. "James, please," he said, holding out his cup. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And I saw what happened this morning at the post." The coffee pot trembled slightly in Sarah's hands. "How long has this been going on?" "Sir shouldn't concern himself," she murmured, though her back still ached from the morning's punishment. The practiced words felt hollow, even to her own ears. James set his cup down with deliberate care. "I've seen your drawings," he said, causing Sarah's heart to skip. "Through the study window. You were sketching in the garden yesterday evening. You have real talent." Fear gripped her chest. Had others seen? But James's next words calmed her rising panic. "Don't worry. I was the only one watching. I'm something of an artist myself, though nowhere near your skill level." He pulled a small leather-bound sketchbook from his jacket. "May I?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. James opened the book to reveal detailed drawings of horses, not the rigid, formal portraits common in ranch houses, but living, breathing creatures caught in moments of freedom and power. "Art," he said, "reveals truth, and the truth I see in your drawings is someone who understands freedom in her soul." He glanced toward the window, ensuring they were still alone. "What's your name?" "Your real name, not what they call you here." "Sarah," she whispered, the name feeling strange on her tongue after so long. Few here used it anymore. James removed his watch, turning it over to show her the engraving on the back. "This was my mother's. She taught me that real worth isn't in what you own, but in what you do with what you have." His eyes met hers directly. "I want to help you, Sarah. Will you trust me?" Before she could respond, boots sounded in the hallway. Sarah quickly stepped back, resuming her servile pose as Blackwood entered the study. The rancher's eyes narrowed, taking in the scene. "Girl, get to the kitchen. Martha needs help with dinner preparations." His tone left no room for argument. As Sarah hurried from the room, she heard him addressing James. "Best not waste time chatting with the help, Mr. Carlton. They get ideas above their station." Through the evening, as Sarah helped serve the elaborate dinner, she felt James watching her, not with the predatory gaze she'd learned to fear from some visitors, but with thoughtful consideration. When Blackwood boasted about the ranch's efficiency, James asked pointed questions about labor costs and treatment of workers that made the older man increasingly uncomfortable. After dinner, as the men gathered for brandy, Sarah overheard fragments of heated conversation through the study door as she cleaned the dining room. "Times are changing, Mr. Blackwood," James's voice carried clearly. "The war's over. Progressive ranches are hiring free workers, paying fair wages. It's not just moral, it's good business." "Progressive," Blackwood spat the word. "Next you'll tell me to give them voting rights." "My father built this ranch on certain principles, Mr. Carlton, and I won't see them undermined by soft-hearted notions." "Principles like that morning's display at the whipping post?" James's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I wonder what the Railroad investors would think about that sort of business practice. Silence fell heavily in the study. When Blackwood spoke again, his voice was dangerous. "You would do well to remember, young man, that this is my ranch. I run it as I see fit." Sarah slipped away before she could hear more, but hope and fear warred in her chest. No one had ever challenged Blackwood like this, not since Miss Eleanor's death. But she'd seen men stand up to him before, only to back down when he brought his influence and money to bear. Yet something about James Carlton was different. The way he'd looked at her drawings, spoken her name, showed her his mother's watch. He saw her as a person, not property. As she prepared the guest room for him that night, she found herself praying that this time things might actually change. Dawn painted the sky in shades of promise as Sarah brought fresh coffee to the veranda, where James Carlton sat reviewing documents from his leather portfolio. He looked up as she approached, his expression grave but determined. "Good morning." "Sarah," he said quietly, ensuring no one else was within earshot, "I'd like you to see something." He withdrew a crisp bank draft from his portfolio, the sum written upon it making her breath catch. "More than fair market value for your purchase. I intend to present it to Blackwood this morning." Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. "Sir, Mr. Carlton, why would you do this?" "Because it's right," he said simply, but his eyes held deeper meaning. "And because talent like yours shouldn't be caged. I've seen more soul in your hidden sketches than in all the fancy paintings hanging in Austin mansions." The sound of boots on wooden boards interrupted them. Blackwood emerged from the house, his face darkening at their proximity. "Early start. Mr. Carlton, good. We have contracts to review." James stood, squaring his shoulders. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, I have a different proposition to discuss." He held up the bank draft. "I'd like to purchase one piece of your property." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he read the amount. His gaze shifted to Sarah, who fought the urge to shrink back. "The girl? She's not for sale." $10,000 is well above market value," James pressed. "You could purchase 3 skilled workers with that sum. This isn't about money." Blackwood's voice carried the dangerous edge Sarah knew too well. "This is about principles, about maintaining proper order." "Order?" James's calm facade cracked. "Slightly. Is that what you call it? I've seen how you maintain order on this ranch." Sarah watched the confrontation unfold, her heart pounding. Other ranch hands had begun to gather at a distance, drawn by the rising voices. Martha appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face creased with worry. "You overstep, Mr. Carlton." Blackwood stepped closer to James, using his height to loom over. The younger man. "Your father may be a powerful man, but this is my ranch. I decide what's for sale and what isn't." James held his ground. "The war's over, Mr. Blackwood. The world is changing. Even Texas can't hold back progress forever." "Progress?" Blackwood barked a harsh laugh. "Let me show you something." He stormed into his study, returning with the ranch ledger. "You see, these numbers? This ranch has operated profitably for 40 years under the old system. I won't have some city-bred idealist telling me how to run my business." "Business?" James's voice was quiet but carried across the veranda. "Is that what you call breaking a young woman's spirit, punishing her for daring to have dreams?" The ledger slammed shut with a crack that made Sarah flinch. "Get off my property. Mr. Carlton, our business is concluded." "Not quite." James withdrew another document from his portfolio. "I've already spoken with the railroad commissioners. They're very interested in certain practices I've observed here. Practices that might complicate their investment decisions." Blackwood's face flushed dark with rage. "You dare threaten me on my own land?" His hand moved to the pistol at his hip. "I could have you shot as a trespasser." "You could," James agreed calmly. "But how would that look to the commissioners, to your business partners in Austin, to your neighbors?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The world is watching, Mr. Blackwood. The old ways are ending. You can adapt, or you can become obsolete." For a moment, Sarah thought Blackwood might actually draw his weapon. Then, with visible effort, he mastered himself. You have 1 hour to clear out, Mr. Carlton. After that, my men will escort you off the property." He turned to Sarah, who stood frozen by the coffee service. "Girl, get to the kitchen where you belong." As Sarah hurried away, she heard Blackwood's final words to James. "And if I see you near my ranch again, our next discussion won't be so civilized." In the kitchen, Martha was waiting. The old cook pulled Sarah into a quick embrace. "Brave man, that Mr. Carlton. Foolish, maybe, but brave." "What's going to happen now?" Sarah whispered, her brief flame of hope guttering in the wake of Blackwood's rage. "Don't you worry," Martha said, though her own face was drawn with concern. "Men like Mr. Carlton, when they set their minds to something, they find a way. But child," she gripped Sarah's shoulders gently, "be careful. The master won't take kindly to anyone he thinks is encouraging this trouble." Through the kitchen window, Sarah watched James Carlton mount his horse an hour later. The young rancher's face was set in grim lines, but as he turned his horse toward the gate, his eyes found her watching. He touched his hat in a gentle salute, and she knew with sudden certainty that this wasn't over. Blackwood spent the rest of the morning in his study, drinking heavily and making angry notations in his ledger. By evening, word had spread through the ranch about the confrontation. Sarah felt eyes on her everywhere she went. Some sympathetic, others resentful of the trouble they feared she'd brought. That night, alone in her tiny room, Sarah pulled out her hidden sketchbook. With trembling fingers, she began to draw. A man on horseback, silhouetted against a rising sun, his face turned toward freedom's horizon. For the first time, she signed her name at the bottom, not in the corner, small and hidden, but bold across the page. Whatever came next, James Carlton had given her something precious, the courage to claim her own identity, even if only on paper. She fell asleep clutching the sketch, dreaming of a world where she could sign her name in the light of day. The letter arrived 3 days after James Carlton's departure, delivered by a nervous young ranch hand who'd ridden into town for supplies. Sarah glimpsed the elegant Carlton family crest on the envelope as she served Blackwood his evening meal. "The arrogance," Blackwood muttered, scanning the contents. Sebastian Carlton himself, threatening to withdraw his support for the railroad venture unless I reconsider my position. "These city folk think they can dictate terms to me?" He crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire. But Sarah noticed, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his whiskey. The Carlton name carried weight, even in Texas. That night, she overheard him arguing with his foreman about alternative cattle buyers, contingency plans. Change crept across the ranch like morning fog. Some hands began treating Sarah differently, a few with newfound kindness, others with suspicious glares. Tom, the stable hand, pulled her aside one morning while she fetched water. "Word's spreading," he whispered. "Carlton's been talking to other ranchers, making waves. Some agree with him about modernizing, hiring free labor. Others—" He glanced around nervously. "Just watch yourself. Master's like a rattler been poked with a stick." Martha noticed too. The old cook kept Sarah close, finding excuses to keep her in the kitchen rather than exposed to Blackwood's increasingly dark moods. "That Carlton boy's stirred up more than he knows," she murmured, while teaching Sarah a new biscuit recipe. Maybe that's what's needed. Sometimes things got to get worse before they get better." A second letter arrived a week later, this one bearing an Austin postmark. Sarah was dusting in the study when Blackwood read it, his face growing stormy. "Railroad Commission postponing their final decision," he growled. "Wanting additional assurances about labor practices. Carlton's been busy." That evening, Blackwood called his most trusted hands to the study. Sarah, serving coffee, caught fragments of their discussion. Words like resistance and example floated through the door. The next morning, the whipping post saw use 3 times before noon, but something had shifted. Each crack of the whip seemed to echo the changing times, every blow revealing the desperation of a man trying to hold back the tide. Even as Blackwood tightened his grip, his power was slipping. In her hidden moments, Sarah continued to draw. Her sketches changed, no longer just dreams of freedom, but portraits of change itself. A crumbling whipping post, a railroad cutting through old boundaries, a young man on horseback leading others toward dawn. Hope, she was learning, could be as dangerous as defiance. But for the first time, she wasn't facing danger alone. Sarah recognized James Carlton's cattle brand, a stylized LC within a rising sun, on the side of the supply wagon that pulled into the ranch one dusty afternoon. The driver, a weather-beaten man named Rodriguez, seemed to take an unusually long time unloading his goods, sharing gossip with the ranch hands. "Carlton's been busy up north," he said loudly enough for Sarah to hear as she swept the porch. "Sold off his prize breeding bulls, consolidated 3 herds into one. Man's liquidating assets like he's planning something big." Later, in the kitchen, Martha pressed a folded newspaper into Sarah's hands. "Rodriguez brought this, said we might find it interesting." The headlines spoke of changing times. Progressive ranchers adopt free labor. Railroad Commission debates modern labor practices. But it was a smaller article that caught Sarah's eye. Carlton heir challenges old guard. The piece detailed James's efforts to modernize ranching practices, his advocacy for fair wages, his growing influence among younger ranchers. "He's not just fighting for you," Martha said softly. "You're becoming a symbol of something bigger, the old ways against the new." That evening, Blackwood hosted several neighboring ranchers. Sarah served them dinner while they discussed the changing landscape. "Carlton's stirring up trouble all along the railroad line," one man complained, "getting workers thinking they deserve more. Rights, dignity, dangerous ideas." "Man's got more money than sense," another added. "Heard he's converting his entire operation, offering contracts, wages, even profit-sharing to his workers." "Profit-sharing," Blackwood's voice dripped contempt. "Next, he'll be inviting them to dinner." But Sarah noticed the uncertainty in some of the younger ranchers' faces. One, barely older than James, spoke up hesitantly. "Labor's getting harder to find. Maybe Carlton's got the right idea about—" "Enough!" Blackwood's fist crashed onto the table. "We didn't build this country by coddling workers. Any man steps out of line, replace him. That's how it's done." The young rancher fell silent, but his eyes followed Sarah thoughtfully as she cleared. The plates. That night she added a new sketch to her collection, the Carlton brand, rising sun and all, but with a broken chain beneath it. Hope was dangerous, yes, but change, she was learning, was unstoppable. The horse appeared on Sarah's windowsill one morning, a small, exquisite charcoal drawing of a mare and foal, rolled carefully and tied with a blue ribbon. She recognized James's style immediately, though this piece showed more emotion than his previous sketches. The mare stood protective over her foal, both figures gazing toward distant mountains. Sarah traced the lines with trembling fingers, understanding the message hidden in the art: protection, promise, freedom. But it was the signature that made her heart skip. To a fellow artist, "Keep drawing your dreams." He was here. Martha whispered later in the kitchen, keeping her voice low. "Late last night, talking with Tom by the stables. Didn't want to risk coming to the house. Blackwood's got men watching." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She'd noticed the new hands Blackwood had hired. Hard men with cold eyes, who spent more time watching the house than working cattle. One had caught her sketching in the garden 2 days ago, and only Martha's quick thinking, claiming she was reviewing laundry lists, had saved her sketchbook from discovery. That evening, while serving dinner to Blackwood and his latest guest, a sharp-eyed lawyer from Austin, Sarah overheard snippets of their conversation. "Carlton's making moves," the lawyer said, spreading papers across the dining table. "Buying up water rights along the railroad route, making allies among the progressive ranchers. Even got the ear of some territorial officials." Blackwood's face darkened. "What's his game?" "Word is he's planning something big. A challenge to the old system itself." The lawyer tapped the papers meaningfully. "Might be wise to consider. His offer for the girl, before things get complicated." "Never." Blackwood's voice could have frozen hell. She's not just property anymore, she's a symbol. Give in on this. We give in on everything. Sarah's hands shook as she poured their coffee, but her mind was racing. James wasn't just fighting for her freedom. He was systematically building a case against the entire system that kept her enslaved. Later that night, she pulled out her own sketchbook. With newfound purpose, she began to draw. A stallion breaking free from its corral, muscles straining, mane flying. She signed it boldly, no longer hiding her talent. The next morning, she slipped the drawing into Rodriguez's supply wagon, wrapped in a piece of kitchen twine. The weathered driver gave her a knowing wink. "Some packages," he said quietly, "are worth more than others." 3 days later, a new sketch appeared on her windowsill. Her stallion, now running free alongside other horses, their combined strength unstoppable. James had adapted her style perfectly, turning her solitary runner into a symbol of collective liberation. But art wasn't their only connection. Through Martha's careful network of whispered information, Sarah learned how James was using his influence. He'd opened his own ranch to escaped slaves, giving them work contracts and fair wages. He was teaching them to read, write, and manage accounts, skills that Blackwood and his kind had always forbidden. "Man's building more than a ranch," Tom confided during one of her water-fetching trips. "He's building a future, different kind of Texas, where a person's worth ain't measured by their chains." Sarah added these stories to her mental collection, each one a stroke in the larger picture of possibility. Her drawings grew bolder, scenes of freedom, dignity, and justice that she hid beneath her floorboards like seeds waiting for spring. But spring, she was learning, often came with storms. One morning she found her windowsill empty, except for scattered ashes. One of Blackwood's watchdogs had intercepted the latest drawing. The message was clear. They were being watched, every moment, every gesture. Yet even this couldn't stop. The art, the dreams, the silent conversation between two souls who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. That night, Sarah drew her boldest piece yet, a portrait of herself, standing tall, broken chains at her feet. In the background, a familiar figure on horseback watched with proud eyes as she stepped into her freedom. She didn't try to send this one to James. Some art, she realized, you create not to share, but to manifest. Every stroke of her charcoal was an act of defiance, every line a declaration. She was not just property to be bought or sold. She was an artist, a dreamer, a human being. And soon she would be free. The broken shackle lay in the dust, its iron surface catching the first red light of dawn. Sarah stared at it from her knees, blood trickling from her split lip, while Blackwood's new men dragged the other escapees back toward the ranch house. It had been so close. Tom had planned everything carefully, the supply wagon waiting by the creek, the distraction of a small fire in the north pasture, even the forged travel papers. But someone had talked. The ambush caught them just past the property line. "Bring them all to the post," Blackwood ordered, his voice colder than a winter storm. "Everyone needs to see what happens to thieves who steal my property." His eyes fixed on Sarah, especially those who should know better. Martha stepped forward, her ancient dignity a shield. "Mr. Blackwood, sir, the girl needs medical attention. The girl needs to learn her place." Blackwood backhanded the cook, sending her stumbling. "And so do you, if you're forgetting yours. That's enough." The voice cut through the morning air like a knife. James Carlton sat atop his horse at the edge of the yard, flanked by 2 other riders. His face was granite. "This is a private matter, Carlton," Blackwood snarled. "You're trespassing." "Am I?" James dismounted smoothly. "Funny thing about property. Lines. Had my surveyor out here last week. Seems that creek marks the actual boundary." He pointed to where they'd been caught. "Those folks were on public land when your men attacked them." Sarah saw the flash of uncertainty cross Blackwood's face. James pressed his advantage, pulling papers from his coat. "I've already filed assault charges with the territorial marshal." He's very interested in hearing about your men attacking free citizens on public land. Free? Blackwood laughed harshly. That paper's worthless, and you know it. Maybe. James's voice remained steady. But how many expensive trials can you afford? How many judges will have to examine your property claims? How many newspapers will print stories about the famous Blackwood Ranch and its methods? The morning wind carried the smell of smoke from the diversionary fire, now dying in the north pasture. Sarah watched the calculation in Blackwood's eyes as he looked from James to his hired men to the growing crowd of ranch hands watching the confrontation. "Take them to the cells," he finally ordered. "We'll deal with this, legally." He turned to James. "Happy now, boy? Playing by the rules you wanted?" "No!" James stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But it's a start. And next time, old man, next time I won't be playing at all." They locked Sarah in the ranch's storage cellar, a cramped space that served as a makeshift jail. Through the tiny window, she watched James ride away, his straight back a promise of return. Hours later, Martha snuck down with bandages and whispered, "News. 3 made it," the cook murmured, cleaning Sarah's wounds. "The ones who went east instead of north. Carlton's men found them, took them to his ranch." She pressed a cool cloth to Sarah's lip. "He's got a plan, child. This wasn't a failure. It was a test. Now he knows who's loyal to Blackwood, who can be trusted." Sarah touched the crude iron bars. "And the others? Tom? Locked up same as you, but alive." Martha's wrinkled hand squeezed hers. "Carlton made sure of that. Man's playing a deeper game than Blackwood knows." That night, alone in her cell, Sarah pulled a piece of charcoal from her dress pocket, the one thing they hadn't taken. On the rough stone wall, she began to draw. Not dreams of freedom this time, but the reality she'd seen. James Carlton, backlit. By dawn, standing like justice itself against oppression. The broken shackle, she learned later, disappeared from the yard. But its image lived on in her mind, no longer a symbol of failure, but a promise of what was to come. Sometimes, she realized, you had to break before you could be truly free. The deck of cards appeared on Blackwood's desk like a challenge. Expensive ivory finish playing cards with gold-leafed edges, the kind used in high-stakes games from New Orleans to San Francisco. James Carlton set them down with deliberate care, his eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. "One game," James said. "Winner takes all." Sarah, dusting the study's bookshelves, felt her heart stop. She hadn't seen James since the failed escape attempt 2 weeks ago, hadn't known he was coming. But here he stood, calm as summer rain, laying out the most dangerous proposition yet. "All?" Blackwood's eyebrow raised. "Define all, Mr. Carlton." "My entire north herd. 2,000 head of prime cattle, plus grazing rights to the waterlands I've acquired." James's voice remained steady. "Against her freedom." Sarah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the feather duster. 2,000 cattle? The number was staggering, far more than her market value, more than any slave had ever been worth. Blackwood picked up the deck, running his fingers along its edges. "And if I refuse? Then tomorrow I file papers with every land office from here to Austin, challenging the legitimacy of your property boundaries. My surveyors have found discrepancies." James smiled thinly. "Imagine the legal fees, the delays. The Railroad Commission would have to postpone their contracts pending resolution." The silence stretched like hot taffy. Sarah hardly dared breathe. Through the window, she could see ranch hands gathering, word of the confrontation spreading. Like wildfire. "One game," Blackwood finally said. 5-card draw, 2 days from now here in my study. Witnessed by the county judge and 3 independent ranchers. "Agreed," James nodded. "And the girl remains unharmed until then. Any mark on her, any accident, and the deal's off." Blackwood's face darkened. "You question my honor?" "I question everything about you." James placed a hand on the cards. 2 days. Have your witnesses ready." After he left, Blackwood sat staring at the deck for a long time. Finally, he looked up at Sarah, Girl, bring me my whiskey, the good bottle. That night, Martha smuggled Sarah an extra candle and a scrap of paper. Write, the cook whispered. Write everything you dream of doing when you're free. Man doesn't risk 2,000 cattle without a plan. Sarah's hands shook as she wrote, not in the flowing script Martha had taught her, but in simple, stark words. Learn to ride, draw in the open, use my real name, see the ocean. Carlton's been planning this for weeks, Martha continued, keeping her voice low. I've been winning big in every poker game from here to Dallas, building a reputation, making sure word got back to the master. But why cards? Sarah whispered. Why not just keep fighting legally? Because of what it means. Martha's eyes were knowing. A game of chance, witnessed by the county's most respected men. If he wins, ain't just you getting freed. It's Blackwood's whole way of thinking that loses. Public, legal, final. Through the next day, Sarah watched the preparations. Blackwood had his men cleaning the study, setting up the poker table, bringing in extra lamps. He spent hours practicing with the cards, his face growing darker with each glass of whiskey. But it was the arrival of Rodriguez's supply wagon that gave Sarah hope. The weathered driver handed her a small package along with the regular supplies. Inside, wrapped in cloth, she found a single playing card, the Ace of Hearts, with a message. In James's hand, some games are won before the first card is dealt. That night, Sarah added to her wall drawing in the cellar a pair of hands holding cards, but behind them a rising sun. The same sun from James's cattle brand, the same sun she'd sketched so many times in her dreams of freedom. 2,000 cattle, her entire worth in Texas Longhorns, ready to be wagered on a turn of a card. But as she stared at the Ace of Hearts, Sarah realized this game wasn't about money or property at all. It was about changing the rules. The stack of property deeds lay spread across James Carlton's camp table, each one representing a piece of his carefully built cattle empire. Sarah caught glimpses of them as she served coffee to the gathering. Witnesses, prominent men from across the county, arriving early to verify the stakes of the upcoming game. 2,000 head of prime stock, Judge Henderson mused, examining the documents, plus water rights along 3 major creek systems. Carlton, my boy, that's a fortune you're wagering. James's eyes met Sarah's briefly as she poured his coffee. Some things are worth more than fortune, Your Honor. The judge's wife, a stately woman with silver hair, studied Sarah with thoughtful eyes. Indeed they are, she murmured, too quietly, for the others to hear. Blackwood hosted the witnesses for dinner, a show of hospitality that fooled no one. Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly as he lifted his wineglass, though his voice remained strong. He'd spent the afternoon with his lawyers, reviewing documents, making sure every detail was legally binding. Your father will disown you. For this, one of the visiting ranchers told James during the meal, Sebastian Carlton isn't known for tolerating risks to the family business. My father taught me to fight for what I believe in, James replied evenly. He may not agree with my methods, but he understands principle. Later, as Sarah cleared the dishes, she overheard Martha talking with the judge's wife in the kitchen. It's not just about the girl, the cook was saying. Mr. Carlton's been buying up land all along the railroad route, offering contracts to breed workers, teaching them to read and write. Building a new kind of ranch, the older woman nodded. My husband says he's already got 30 families settled on his northern property. Former slaves, all of them now earning wages, learning trades. A man who'd risk everything on a card game, Martha mused. Might be just the kind of man Texas needs right now. That evening, as the witnesses retired to their rooms, Sarah caught a glimpse of James walking alone in the garden. He was practicing with the cards, his hands moving with fluid grace as he shuffled. But it was his expression that held her attention. Not anxiety about the stakes, but the calm certainty of a man who'd found his true purpose. Through whispered conversations and careful observation, Sarah began to understand the depths of James's preparation. He hadn't just been winning poker games, He'd been building a reputation for honesty and fair play. Every victory had been witnessed. Every hand played straight. No one could question his integrity when it mattered most. Even the timing was strategic. The Railroad Commission would meet in 2 weeks to finalize contracts. Blackwood needed their business. His recent investments in security had strained his finances more than most knew. He couldn't afford a lengthy legal challenge to his property lines, not with the commission already questioning his labor practices. "Man's got him boxed in tight as a new saddle," Tom whispered during her evening water run. "Win or lose tomorrow. Things are changing. Carlton's made sure of that." Sarah spent that night adding to her wall drawing in the cellar. The property deeds transformed into wings, lifting her sketch of James toward that ever-present rising sun. Hope was no longer just a dream. It had become a strategy, a calculation, a carefully dealt hand of cards. In her hidden sketchbook, she drew one final picture, a portrait of herself as she hoped to be tomorrow, head high, eyes clear, standing as an equal among the witnesses to her own liberation. At the bottom, she wrote the words she'd practiced, in secret for weeks, Sarah Carlton. Then she stopped, shocked by her own presumption, but the name remained, a whispered possibility, a future dealt from a deck of ivory cards with gold-leafed edges. The hidden ace slipped from Blackwood's sleeve like a serpent, quick and deadly. In the lamplight of the study, Sarah saw it clearly from where she stood serving drinks to the witnesses, saw too the slight widening of James's eyes, the only indication he'd caught the deception. The evening had started formally enough. Judge Henderson sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 prominent ranchers. The property deeds and bill of sale lay before him, each document carefully verified. The ivory cards gleamed as challenger, performed the first shuffle. "Standard 5-card draw," the judge announced. "1 round, winner takes all. Mr. Carlton's 2,000 head of cattle and water rights against the freedom and papers of the girl called Sarah." He looked at both men. "Are these terms accepted?" "They are," James said quietly. Blackwood merely nodded, his eyes never leaving the cards. The first hands were dealt, each card falling with the weight of destiny. Sarah watched James study his cards, his face composed. Blackwood's expression was harder to read, shadows from the lamp dancing across his features. "3 cards," Blackwood said, discarding. "2. James responded. The replacements were dealt, and then Sarah saw it. The practiced movement as Blackwood reached for his whiskey glass, the ace sliding smooth as silk from his sleeve. Before she could react, Judge Henderson's hand shot out, grabbing Blackwood's wrist. "I believe, sir, you've just invalidated our agreement." The room exploded into motion. Blackwood lunged to his feet, overturning the table. Cards scattered like leaves in a storm. Through the window, Sarah glimpsed armed men rushing toward the house, Blackwood's security responding to the chaos. "You have no proof," Blackwood roared, but his face had gone pale beneath its flush of whiskey. "On the contrary," James's voice cut through the tumult. He reached into his coat, withdrew a small camera obscura device. "The latest technology from Boston. Been recording the whole game." He smiled thinly. "The Railroad Commission will find the photographs particularly interesting." Blackwood's hand moved to his gun, but 3 witnesses already had their weapons trained on him. Outside, more riders were arriving, James's men, positioned for just this moment. "You planned this," Blackwood whispered. "All of it. The game, the witnesses, the camera." "I planned for your nature," James corrected. "You're predictable." "Mr. Blackwood, push a man's pride hard enough, he'll reveal who he truly is." Judge Henderson cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances and the witnessed attempt at fraudulent play, I have no choice but to declare this game and its stakes forfeit to Mr. Carlton." "You can't," Blackwood started. "I can, and I have." The judge's voice was iron. "The law's changing, Marcus. Men like you either change with it or get left behind." Sarah hardly dared breathe as James picked up her bill of sale from among the scattered cards. "By right of forfeit, and witnessed by this company, I declare..." These papers void. He struck a match, touched it to the document's corner. And this woman free. The paper caught quickly, curling into ash. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, unashamed, but Blackwood wasn't finished. With a roar of rage, he drew his pistol. "No slave makes a fool of me!" Several things happened at once. Sarah saw the gun swing toward her. She heard James shout a warning. And then Martha, dear brave Martha, accidentally tripped while carrying a pot of hot coffee. The scalding liquid caught Blackwood full in the face. His shot went wild, splintering a bookshelf. Before he could recover, James and 2 witnesses had him disarmed and pinned. "That's assault with deadly intent," Judge Henderson said grimly. "Witnessed by officers of the court. The law's clear on that, even in Texas." Through the door, Tom appeared with the territorial marshal and 2 deputies. "Perfect timing," James said, unsurprised. "The marshal's been waiting to serve several warrants. Seems there are questions about certain property arrangements, worker treatment, and now attempted murder." Sarah watched them lead Blackwood away, his fine clothes coffee-stained, his dignity in tatters. The man who had ruled her world for so long suddenly seemed small, diminished by his own hatred. "Miss Sarah," James's voice was gentle. She turned to find him holding a new document. Not a bill of sale, but a certificate of emancipation. "Your papers, properly witnessed and signed. You're free to go wherever you choose." Her hands trembled as she took the document. Martha appeared beside her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The cook's eyes shone with tears and triumph. "The question," James continued softly, "is where do you want to go?" Sarah looked at the certificate, then at the scattered cards. On the floor, one caught her eye, the Ace of Hearts, the same card James had sent as a message. But this one was different. Written in tiny script along its edge were the words, "Some games are played for keeps." She met his gaze steadily. "I hear there's a ranch up north, progressive place, treats people fair, teaches them to read and write, even lets them draw." James smiled. And in that smile she saw not just her freedom, but her future. "I know just the place." Through the window, dawn was breaking over Texas. The sun rose like hope, like promise, like a brand new game where all the cards were finally dealt fair and square. The written testament lay open on Judge Henderson's desk, its pages filling rapidly with signatures as workers from across the ranch came forward. Each told their story of Blackwood's cruelty. Hidden graves, midnight beatings, families torn apart. Sarah watched from the study doorway as years of secrets spilled into the light. "Your testimony could be important," the judge told her gently, "but only if you choose to give it." Sarah straightened her shoulders, feeling the strange lightness where the iron collar had been. James had removed it himself, using a metal file. With careful patience, until the hateful thing fell away. "I'll testify," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Some stories need to be told." Outside, the ranch hummed with nervous energy. Blackwood's hired men had fled upon his arrest, leaving a power vacuum that nature abhors. Several older hands had stepped up to maintain order, led by Tom, who'd apparently been James's eyes and ears for months. "Carlton's offered contracts. To any who want to stay on," Tom announced to the gathered workers. "Fair wages, proper housing, schooling for children, same as he does up north." Martha appeared at Sarah's side, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands. "Drink this, child. It's been a long morning." The cook's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Never thought I'd live to see this day." James was in the barn, consulting with the marshal about Blackwood's books. They'd found hidden ledgers documenting years of illegal dealings, stolen cattle, forged papers, bribes paid and received. The evidence mounted with each passing hour. "The territorial governor's been looking for a test case," the marshal explained. "Something to challenge the old system, set new precedents. This might be it." Sarah found herself studying James as he worked. The wealthy cattle baron's son had risked everything on this gambit. Not just his fortune, but his standing in society. Yet he seemed more alive than ever, energized by the chance to build something new from the ashes of the old. "Miss Sarah?" A timid voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Lucy, one of the housemaids, clutching a familiar object. "Found this in the master's study. Thought you might want it back." She held out Sarah's sketchbook. Sarah took it with trembling hands. Blackwood must have found it during the escape attempt, kept it as evidence of her rebellion. She opened it slowly, expecting to find the pages torn or defaced. Instead, she found a new sketch tucked inside, one of James's drawings showing her, as she'd looked this morning, head held high as she took possession of her freedom papers. "He saw you," James said quietly, having approached without her noticing. "Even before I did. Every time you made a sketch, you were declaring your humanity. That's what frightened him most." A commotion at the front gate drew their attention. Riders were approaching, other ranchers from the area, drawn by news of Blackwood's arrest. Sarah recognized some of them from recent meetings. "They're worried," James explained, "about what this means for their own operations, about change coming faster than they're ready for." "And is it?" Sarah asked. "Coming fast? Look around." He gestured to where Tom was organizing work crews, where Martha was planning meals for the newly enlarged household, where the judge's wife was already taking inventory of buildings that could be converted into schoolrooms. Change isn't coming. It's here. Sarah opened her sketchbook to a blank page. With sure strokes, she began to draw the scene before her. Not just the physical details, but the feeling of this moment when the old world gave way to the new. Every line declared, "I am here. I am free. I am witness." This, she realized, was freedom's true price. Not the 2,000 cattle or the poker games drama, but the courage to stand up, to testify, to create without fear, to become not just free on paper, but free in spirit. And as she drew, she felt James watching with quiet pride, understanding that some victories are won not with cards or guns or laws, but with the simple revolutionary act of claiming your own humanity. The loading rifle felt heavy in Tom's hands as he positioned men around the ranch house. Through the dawn mist, they could see the torches of Blackwood's supporters gathering on the ridge, former overseers, neighboring ranchers who feared change, hired guns drawn by promises of silver. "At least 40 riders," Tom reported to James. "In the study. Well armed. Word is they're planning to restore order before the Railroad Commission's final vote." Sarah watched James check his own rifle with practiced ease. The past 3 days had brought a steady stream of threats and warnings. Now, it seemed, words were giving way to action. "Get everyone who can't fight into the root cellar," James ordered. "Martha knows the escape tunnel that leads to the creek. If things go bad, get them out through there." But Sarah had no intention of hiding. She'd spent too many years being protected by others. "I can shoot," she said firmly. Both men turned to look at her. "Pa taught me before, and I won't hide while others fight for my freedom." James studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Tom, give her your spare revolver. And Sarah, be careful. Freedom won't mean much if you're not alive to enjoy it." Through the window, they watched more torches appear on the ridge. Judge Henderson had left 2 deputies behind when he took Blackwood to Austin, but 2 lawmen wouldn't make much difference against these numbers. "They'll try to burn." "Who's out?" Tom said grimly. "It's what Blackwood would do." As if in answer, a flaming arrow arced through the pre-dawn darkness, landing in the hay bales by the barn. More followed, a deadly rain of fire. "Water crews, move!" James commanded. Men and women who'd prepared for this moment rushed to battle. The flames, with pre-positioned buckets and barrels. Sarah took her position at an upstairs window, the revolver steady in her hands. Below, she could hear Martha organizing the children and elderly into the cellar, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Riders coming in!" Tom's warning rang out. Through the mist, Sarah saw mounted figures emerging, guns raised. The first shots cracked across the yard. James's men, positioned behind makeshift barricades, returned fire with disciplined precision. Sarah held her shot, remembering her father's lessons. Wait for a clear target. Make each bullet count. A torch-wielding rider broke through the defensive. Line charging for the house. Sarah's revolver cracked once. The man tumbled from his saddle, his torch sputtering in the dirt. "Good shot," James called from his position by the door. Their eyes met briefly, and Sarah saw in his face not just approval, but respect. The battle settled into a deadly rhythm. The attackers would charge, be driven back, regroup, and charge. Again, each assault was met with determined resistance, but James's ammunition wouldn't last forever. "Railroad men coming!" A shout went up from the eastern watch. Sarah's heart leaped. Through the growing light, she could see a large group of riders approaching, railroad commission guards, drawn by the gunfire. "Stand down!" Her amplified voice boomed across the battlefield. "This is the territorial marshal. Stand down or be fired upon." The effect was immediate. The attacking force scattered like leaves in a wind, unwilling to face official law enforcement. Within minutes, the ridge was empty except for a few abandoned torches. As the sun rose fully, Sarah finally lowered her revolver. Her hands were shaking now, the delayed reaction setting in. James appeared beside her, gently taking the weapon. "You did well," he said softly. "But the real fight's just beginning. Men like that, they don't give up easily on their way of life." Looking out over the smoke-streaked yard, Sarah nodded. She understood now why James had spent so much time building alliances, securing support from the railroad and territorial authorities. Freedom wasn't won in a single hand of poker or a single dawn battle. It had to be defended again and again until the old ways finally crumbled. "I know," she said, "but we've got something they don't." "What's that?" She smiled, thinking of the drawings hidden in her sketchbook, of Martha's secret reading lessons, of Tom's quiet resistance. Hope, the kind that grows stronger every time they try to crush it. James's hand found hers, warm and sure. Together they watched the railroad, guards securing the ranch, marking another step in the long journey from the old world to the new. The burning barn cast hellish light across the ranch yard as Blackwood himself strode through the gates. He'd escaped custody during transport to Austin, and now he'd returned with every hired gun and sympathetic rancher he could muster. "Carlton!" His voice boomed across the smoky darkness. "Come out and face me. Let's settle this like men." Sarah watched from the ranch house window as James stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready at his side. The territorial marshal and his men had been drawn away by a false emergency. A planned distraction, she realized now. "It's over, Blackwood," James called back. "The Railroad Commission's already voted. The new labor laws take effect at midnight." "Laws," Blackwood spat. "I built this land before your fancy laws. Built it with blood and bullets, not paper and promises." He gestured to the armed men spreading out behind him. "These men understand that. They know what's coming if we let your kind change things." The fire spread to the stable roof, painting the scene in shades of orange and black. Sarah could see Tom and the others moving quietly into defensive positions, just as they'd planned and practiced. "Last chance," James warned. "Leave now, and we'll let bygones be bygones." Blackwood's answer was a bullet that splintered the porch railing near James's head. The night erupted into gunfire. Sarah raced down the stairs, Martha's old shotgun in her hands. The cook had shown her where it was kept, loaded with rock salt. Hurts like hell but won't kill unless you're too close. Through the chaos, she heard Martha herding the children toward the root cellar again. But this time was different. This time they were fighting not just for survival, but for a future they could already taste. "Right flank!" Tom's shout cut through the noise. Sarah saw what he meant, Blackwood's men trying to circle around toward the vulnerable back door. She took position at a window, the shotgun's report adding to the din. James was everywhere, directing defenders, returning fire, keeping their resistance organized despite the overwhelming numbers against them. His voice carried calm authority, even through the storm of bullets. Then Sarah saw it, Blackwood and 3 men breaking away from the main fight, heading for the study. The ledgers were there, the evidence that would doom him in court. Of course, He'd want to destroy them. Without hesitation, she raced through the house's back passages, servants' routes she knew better than anyone. She reached the study seconds before Blackwood burst in through the main door. Well, well, his face twisted in an ugly smile. The little artist, all grown up and playing soldier. Not playing, Sarah said, and fired. The rock salt caught. One of his men full in the chest, sending him stumbling back with a howl of pain. Blackwood's gun came up, but Sarah was already diving behind the heavy desk. His bullet thudded into oak as she scrambled for cover. "Burn it!" he ordered his remaining. "Minty, burn it all!" The sound of breaking glass. They were spreading lamp oil. Sarah smelled the sharp kerosene tang. One spark, and the whole room would go up. Then James's voice. "Drop them!" He stood in the doorway, rifle raised, Tom and two others backing him. Blackwood's men hesitated. "Now!" James's command cut through their uncertainty. Guns clattered to the floor. But Blackwood himself turned toward the oil-soaked desk, striking a match. "If I burn, it all burns." The match fell. Sarah burst from cover, tackling him. They hit the floor as flames erupted behind them. Through the smoke and chaos, she heard James shouting orders, felt hands pulling her to safety. When the smoke cleared, Blackwood lay unconscious, blood trickling from where his head had struck the corner of his precious ledger cabinet. The evidence was safe, the flames contained. Victory settled over the ranch like dawn after a storm. Sarah stood in the yard, watching the sun rise through the smoke, feeling the weight of history turning beneath her feet. James appeared beside her, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "It's really over," she said softly. "This part is." He smiled. "The rest is just beginning." Together they watched as the territorial marshal, the real one this time, rode through the gates with reinforcements, too late for the fight, but just in time for justice. The marshal's badge caught the morning light as Judge Henderson read the charges in the ranch yard. Workers and witnesses gathered to hear Blackwood's crimes enumerated in the clear light of day. Assault, attempted murder, falsifying documents, violation of the new labor laws, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. "Marcus Blackwood," the judge's voice carried across the hushed crowd, "you are hereby remanded to territorial custody pending trial. Your assets will be held in trust, with priority given to compensating those you have wronged." Blackwood stood in chains, his fine clothes still smoky from the night's battle. The proud rancher, who had ruled through fear, now seemed diminished, his power stripped away not by force alone, but by the steady march of justice. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled at James. "There'll be others. Men who understand that power comes from strength, not your precious laws." "No," James replied quietly. "Power comes from justice. You just never understood the difference." Sarah watched from beside Martha as the marshal's men led Blackwood toward the waiting prison wagon. Other officials were already moving through. The crowd, taking statements from workers, documenting conditions, building a case that would set precedent across the territory. "The Railroad Commission sends its congratulations," a well-dressed man told James, offering his hand. "Your new labor contracts will serve as a model for other ranches along the line. Progressive methods, fair wages, it's the future of Texas." Ranching. Tom appeared with a stack of papers, contracts for every worker who wanted to stay on under the new management. "Already got 20 signatures," he reported. "People know a good thing when they see it." But it was the arrival of the schoolteacher that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. A young woman from Austin, recommended by the judge's wife. She carried books and supplies for the ranch's first proper school. "We'll start with reading and writing," she announced to the gathered children and adults alike. "Then mathematics, history, science, whatever you want to learn." James found Sarah watching the schoolteacher organize her materials. "I took the liberty," he said softly, "of requesting extra art supplies. Thought you might want to teach a few classes yourself." Sarah turned to him, seeing not just the man who had fought for her freedom, but the future he represented. "You planned for everything, didn't you?" "Not everything." His smile was warm. Couldn't plan for how you'd change everything I thought I knew about courage and dignity. The territorial governor's representative arrived next, carrying official papers that would transform the ranch into a cooperative trust. Former slaves would become shareholders, their labor building equity in the very land they worked. It's a new model, the man explained. Based on Carlton's northern ranch, workers earn shares over time, have a voice in management decisions. Success is shared, just like responsibility. As the morning progressed, more changes took shape. The old slave quarters were marked for demolition to be replaced with proper family homes. The whipping post was torn down, its wood thrown into the still smouldering remains of the barn fire. Martha organized a celebration feast, cooking up everything she could find in the kitchen. "A free meal," she declared. "Cooked by free people, served to free people." Sarah found herself at the center of it all, her story already becoming legend. The slave girl whose art had captured a cattle baron's heart, whose dignity had inspired a revolution in ranch management, whose courage had helped bring down the old system. "Tell us about the poker game," children begged, gathering around her. "Tell us about the shooting," but Sarah had a different story to tell. Taking out her sketchbook, she began to draw as she spoke, showing them how art had kept her spirit alive during the darkest days, how it had helped her see beyond the boundaries others tried to impose. "Freedom," she told them, "isn't just in papers or laws, it's in here." She touched her heart. "In the dreams you refuse to surrender, the dignity you hold on to, the future you dare to imagine." James joined her as the sun began to set, the ranch peaceful at last. Together, they watched workers heading to their homes, not as property, but as people with a stake in their own destiny. "Ready to head north?" he asked. "My ranch could use an art teacher too." Sarah looked at the land she had known all her life, seeing it new in the light of freedom. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm ready for the next chapter." The marriage certificate gleamed with fresh ink in the morning sun, the words James Carlton and Sarah Freeman written in elegant script. Sarah had chosen her surname herself, because every free person should have a family name, James had said. The ceremony was held on James's northern ranch, under a canopy of Texas oaks. Workers and their families gathered to witness the union, along with railroad officials, progressive ranchers, and even James's father, Sebastian Carlton, who had surprised everyone by not only attending but standing proudly beside his son. "You changed my mind," the elder Carlton had told Sarah the night before. "When James first wrote about risking everything for a slave girl, I thought he'd lost his senses. But then he sent me your drawings." He pulled one from his coat, her sketch of the broken chains. "That's when I understood what he saw in you. Not just talent, but vision." Martha had come up from Blackwood's old ranch, now a thriving cooperative, to bake the wedding cake. Tom stood as James's best man, while the judge's wife, who'd become a dear friend, gave Sarah away. "Never seen a bride quite like you," Martha said as she helped Sarah with her dress. "Most girls just dream of marriage. You dreamed a whole new world into being first." The dress itself was a work of art, simple but elegant, with subtle embroidery. Along the hem showing scenes from their story, a deck of cards, a rising sun, broken chains transformed into flowering vines. Sarah had designed the pattern herself. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated, Sarah took in the changes, already visible on James's ranch. The newly built schoolhouse stood proud near the main house, its windows bright with children's artwork. Former slaves worked alongside hired hands as equals, their children playing together in the yard. "Ready for the surprise?" James asked, taking her hand. He led her to what had been an unused barn, now transformed into an art studio. Easels stood ready, shelves lined with supplies, huge windows letting in natural light. "This is," Sarah's voice caught, "yours," James finished, "to teach, to create, to show others how to see the world as you do." He smiled. "The Railroad Commission wants to commission a series of works, scenes of the new Texas taking shape. I told them I knew just the artist. Sarah walked through the studio in wonder, touching easels, opening paint boxes. On the far wall hung her original sketches from Blackwood's ranch, the hidden dreams that had helped her survive. How did you get these? Martha, James explained. She went back to your old room after everything settled, found them under the floorboards, thought you might want them for your first art exhibition. The idea of exhibiting her work, of showing others the journey from bondage to freedom through art, brought fresh tears to her eyes. But they were tears of joy, of possibilities unlimited as the Texas sky. As evening approached, the celebration moved to the main house. Workers and guests alike shared stories, songs, and dreams for the future. Sarah found herself the center of attention again, but this time not as a curiosity or a cause, but as a leader in her own right. Tell us about the art school you're in planning, the railroad commissioner's wife urged. Show us those designs for the new ranch logo, a progressive rancher called. Sarah shared her vision for teaching art to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their background. She spoke of using creativity to heal old wounds, to build bridges between communities, to help others find their voice, just as she had found hers. James watched her with pride, seeing not the frightened slave girl he'd first met, but a strong woman whose courage had helped reshape their corner of Texas. Later, as they stood on the porch watching the sun set on their wedding day, Sarah took out her sketchbook one last time. One more drawing to add to the collection, she said. Together, they watched her create their portrait, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in the great work of building something new. Behind them, in the sketch, the sun rose on a Texas where freedom wasn't just a word in a document, but a living reality growing stronger with each passing day. Sarah's new sketchbook lay open on her studio desk, its pages filled with fresh visions of the future. Through the wide windows, she could see students gathering for her morning art class, former slaves, ranch hands, children, even a few neighboring ranchers who'd discovered an unexpected love for creation. A year had passed since the wedding, and change had swept across Texas like a spring storm. Blackwood's conviction had set legal precedents that were already reshaping labor practices throughout the territory. The Railroad Commission had made fair wages and proper working conditions mandatory for all contracts. James had been right. Freedom wasn't a single moment, but a continuing journey. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities to build. The world they'd dreamed of, the cooperative trust model they'd pioneered, was spreading to other ranches, proving that justice and profit could walk hand in hand. Sarah paused in her sketching as James appeared in the doorway, his smile bright as ever. Ready to show the children how art can change the world. She looked down at her latest drawing, a scene of students discovering their own creative voices, their faces bright with possibility. Above them, the sun rose once again, eternal symbol of hope and renewal. Yes, she said, standing to greet her husband and her future. I'm ready. In the harsh winter of 1870,